Hello, Introduction to Philosophy students. Welcome back to our video lectures. Today we will be talking about Ultimate Questions, Chapter 8, What Ought We to Do? There's a lot to get through this week, so I hope you will grab a snack and make yourself comfortable. And I also, again, recommend that you split up this lecture into parts. And these headings that outline this lecture are a natural place to pause and take a break and come back another day. So I will be talking specifically, we'll start with an introduction, and then I'll be talking about 6 ethical theories. The first 2 are ethical subjectivism and cultural relativism. We'll talk about how those 2 theories are similar. And the remaining 4 are also similar to one another, but different from the first 2. Those last 4 theories are divine command theory, utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics. So by the end of this lecture, you should know what all of those terms mean. To begin with, an introduction. So we're talking about morality here. The title of the chapter is What Ought I to Do? And that question is really a central question within ethics or morality. I will use those terms interchangeably. But ethics is really the study of how we should live. What is the right thing to do, and how do we decide? And is there even an answer to that question? These are the kinds of questions that we're asking within ethics. And this subject matter, the first thing I want to point out is that it is about your life. When we're asking about what ought I to do, we're asking about people like you, right? You have to personalize this subject matter and think about what matters to you and how you want your life to go, and what you think makes a life a good life, and that these questions that we encounter as we live our lives are the subject matter of ethics. There are all kinds of questions that come up within moral theory. Some of them are profound, big, important questions like should the death penalty be legal? Or how can we preserve a sustainable future on our planet? And other questions seem small and mundane, like what should I eat for dinner? Or what should I tell my best friend when I'm about to talk to them with all this going on in our relationship? So we ask bigger questions within ethics, like about what kind of policies we should have as a society, and we can ask smaller questions about our day-to-day lives, like what should we have for dinner? And all of these kinds of questions have an ethical component. So ethics studies all of these kinds of questions. For example, should college campuses reopen? That was one question we looked at in depth in another class, a question that's affecting all of our lives right now at this moment. Should we defund the police? Another moral question that's being taken up in cities across the country. And all of these other kinds of questions that I've just thrown out here. And you can think of lots of other questions that maybe you actually have already asked today about your life and what you should do. But there are infinitely many ethical questions we can ask. So moral theory, moral theories are trying to do a couple of things. One is that they're trying to answer this question. What is going on when we ask these sorts of moral questions? When we ask what policies we should adopt as a country, or what we should have for dinner, or whether we should lie to our friend. What is going on when we ask those sorts of moral questions, those sort of more tangible, hands-on moral questions? Moral theories are trying to understand what those questions are about. Specifically, they want to know, are there any objective answers to these questions? Are there objective moral facts? And by objective here, we mean facts that are true independently of what we might believe about them. So independently of our beliefs. It seems like if we're talking about science, for example, there are objective scientific facts and we can be wrong about what the facts are. So scientific facts are objective in the sense of being independent of our beliefs in that way, that we can be wrong about them. They're sort of out there, even if we believe some fact about how fast light travels or How far is the closest star? Our believing certain answers to those questions don't make those answers true, right? They exist independently of us. How close is the nearest star is something that was true long before there were even humans, long before humans formed beliefs about how far the closest star is. So the question within morality, this question is, are there a similar set of mind-independent facts about morality, independent of what we believe about them, that are sort of out there for us to come to know? And moral theories also want to know, if there are objective answers, how do we find out what the answers are? So in addition to saying whether there are objective answers or not, moral theories are going to try to tell us, in most cases, what those answers are, how we find them out, where to look for the answers. So take this question again, are there objective moral facts? The moral theories that we're going to look at in this chapter are split on their answer to this question. So we're going to look at several theories that say, no, there are no objective moral facts. There are no facts that are out there independently of what we believe. And on the other side of this question, we're going to look at several theories that say, yes, there are objective moral facts, and here's how we know what they are. Here's what underlies what the moral facts are. Okay, so they're going to give us alternative responses to this question. So on the no side, we're going to look at ethical subjectivism and cultural relativism. They both deny that there are objective moral facts. They say, no, there are no facts that are out there independent of what we believe. And on the other side, we're going to look at divine command theory, utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics. And all four of these theories on the yes side say, yes, there are objective moral facts, and they give us different ways to discern what those moral facts are, different groundings for the moral facts. Okay, I'll leave you with this. Incest is wrong. 1 minute. Okay, just had to shut the front door. Okay, so as an introduction to these 6 theories, I thought it would be good to take a sentence like this, incest is wrong, and look at how these theories would understand this sentence, because that will sort of give us an overview of what we're getting at here. So the ethical subjectivist, the first theory we're going to look at, interprets this sentence as saying, I don't like incest. Okay, notice it's about your personal preference. I don't like incest is how the ethical subjectivist would understand incest is wrong. Now, notice that these theories, I'm not necessarily saying they agree with this statement. This is just the interpretation they would give, and this is a really rough sketch, so we're going to get much more into these explanations as we move, but this is sort of an overview of how to think about these 6 moral theories. So the ethical subjectivist understands incest is wrong as I don't like incest. The cultural relativist replaces that I with we. We don't like incest, where we is about some culture that you're a part of. The divine command theorist would say incest is wrong means that God doesn't like it. God commands us not to do it. The utilitarian understands this sentence to mean incest doesn't promote the greatest happiness. It's all about happiness for the utilitarian. The deontologist, that is a person who believes in deontology, would understand incest is wrong as saying incest does not satisfy the categorical imperative. And we're going to talk about the categorical imperative when we get to deontology. And the virtue theorist would say incest is wrong means good people don't commit incest. It's just not something that's part of it. You're a good character. Okay, so that's the overview of the 6 theories. So now we're going to talk about ethical subjectivism, the first theory. So remember that we're looking at 2 theories that deny that there are objective ethical facts first. So these 2 theories are ethical subjectivism and moral and cultural relativism. So to begin with, ethical subjectivism. So this is the person who says incest is wrong means I don't like incest. So ethical subjectivism is the view that an individual's believing a moral judgment makes it true. So having a moral belief on this view means that your moral belief is correct. Okay? And that's true for every individual who has moral beliefs. So believing something on this view makes it the case that it's true. So if I believe that incest is wrong and you believe that incest is not wrong, then on this view, ethical subjectivism, there's a sense in which we are both correct. My view is true because I believe it, so we might say it's true for me, and your view is true because you believe it. It's true for you. I have to let the dog out. One moment. All right. Pandemic teaching. All right. So ethical subjectivism. What's true morally depends on what each individual believes. Okay. So on this view, you might think of ethics as more like your taste in ice cream flavors or something like that, where if I said mango ice cream is better than peanut butter ice cream, and you said, no, peanut butter ice cream is better than mango ice cream, there's a sense in which we'd both be correct. There's no further fact about whether mango is better than peanut butter. It's just kind of up to what you feel, what your preference is. And so if I say mango's better than peanut butter, as long as I really believe it, then it's correct. It's true for me. And we have to sort of take ethical statements with that same kind of grain of salt, that it's true for you, but it's not true objectively or true as if there's some hard fact out there that we can be wrong about. You cannot be wrong about morality according to ethical subjectivism, because whatever you believe makes it the case. It's true because you believe it. So this might be kind of appealing because we all have different moral beliefs, and this theory, ethical subjectivism, sort of says that's the end of the story. Like, what we believe is all there is, right? But there are immediate problems with this view, and the author raises three in particular. So the first one is the school shooter example. The school shooter example points to somebody who goes into a school and murders people and believes that they're doing the right thing when they do it. Well, if you're an ethical subjectivist, then you have to say that the school shooter's beliefs are correct. Shooting up the school is the right thing to do from their perspective, for them, right? In that sense that we were just talking about. So you can't really say that the shooter is doing the wrong thing because they're doing what's correct within their own moral belief set. But if you think that actually the shooter is acting abhorrently, that's just crazy and very, very wrong and immoral, no matter what they believe, then you might not be an ethical subjectivist, because you're denying that their belief that they're doing the right thing makes it true that they're doing the right thing. You're saying, no, they're doing the wrong thing no matter what they believe. And so ethical subjectivism cannot be the correct view of morality, because school shooters don't get to be doing the right thing just because they believe they are. School shooters are morally abhorrent, doing something terrible that's morally terrible, and we should condemn it even if they believe that they're doing the right thing. The second objection that the author brings up is the problem with ethical disagreement. So it seems like we can disagree ethically. That if I say we should defund the police and you say no, we shouldn't defund the police, that we are actually disagreeing about something, that we should keep, we could keep talking about it until we come to some agreement. And that if it may turn out that one of us is incorrect, and we would sort of convince the other one to agree with us. Well, according to ethical subjectivism, disagreements don't really work like that. we're actually not really disagreeing if you're an ethical subjectivist, because you're only asserting something that's true because you believe it. So if you say we should defund police and I say we shouldn't defund the police, then we're both correct. So there's not really room for disagreement because we're both already fully correct. It's not as if one of us could come around and learn that we were wrong and be convinced by the other one. There's no such thing as being wrong in morality because everything you believe is correct on this view. So ethical subjectivism seems not to make the right sense of what seems like ethical disagreement. It seems like we can genuinely disagree, but ethical subjectivism denies that. It'd be like if I were talking to you and I said, it's raining, and you said, no, it's not raining, and then we argued about whether it's raining, but we're in different cities, right? So it could be that it's raining here, and so it's correct when I say it's raining, but it's not raining wherever you are. So when you say it's not raining, then you're correct also. We're not really disagreeing if I say it's raining and you say no, it's not. There's no point in continuing to argue about that. We're both correct because what we're saying only applies to the location where we happen to be at that time. So ethical subjectivism makes ethical judgments something like that. And the final objection that we're going to consider is the problem of infallibility. So ethical subjectivism makes us all morally infallible. So recall that list of a couple dozen questions I put up at the beginning of this lecture. Well, whatever your responses to those questions are, like should I eat meat, or should I go to my brother's wedding, or should I lie to my best friend about what I think of their outfit? These questions, no matter what you believe about them, no matter what your answer is, it's going to be correct. So it makes us all infallible because it says whatever you believe is true because your belief makes it true. So it can't be that you have a wrong moral belief. But it seems like that's just counterintuitive. Like we all have some moral beliefs that are wrong and that we need to scrutinize and change. It seems like that. But if ethical subjectivism is true, then that's not the way to look at things because no matter what we believe, it's correct. So that seems like the wrong moral theory. So maybe cultural relativism can do better because cultural relativism is another way of denying that there are objective moral facts, another theory that denies that, but it's a little more sophisticated and it meets some of the objections that we just considered with regard to ethical subjectivism. So cultural relativism, so back to the incest statement, cultural relativism says incest is wrong means we don't like incest, where we refers to whatever culture you're a part of. So according to cultural relativism, a culture's believing a moral judgment makes it true. So it's not the individual that matters in this case, and it's not the individual's belief, it's the cultural attitude, the culture of which you're a part. And the cultural relativist is going to have to tell us more about how you determine what is the relevant culture in this case. So is it the culture of my city, Durham, or is it the culture of my country, the United States, or is it some other culture like the culture of campus or a fraternity or a sorority? Like which culture is the culture that determines the moral truth here? The cultural relativist has to have a story about that to fill that in. That's something left for them to do, but it's some culture or other that we're a part of that makes it the case whether something is morally correct or not. Okay, so whatever the culture's attitude about it is, that's what's correct. Now you'll notice that it overcomes some of those objections from ethical relativism from ethical subjectivism, which is a kind of relativism, because it says you can be infallible. Remember, that was an objection to ethical subjectivism. According to cultural relativism, individuals, are fallible. They can be wrong in their moral beliefs because you might have a moral belief that doesn't fit with in your culture's attitude. So you might have a belief that goes against what your culture says about something. So you might live in a place where same-sex marriage is seen as very wrong, but you might believe that it's not wrong. Well, in that case, if cultural relativism is true, your community, the cultural attitude is correct. It can't be wrong. But your belief, because it goes against that, is incorrect. Okay, so that's what this view entails. Cultural relativism, whatever culture is the relevant one, whatever they believe, the attitudes they have about moral judgments are correct because a culture's believing a moral judgment makes it correct. Okay, so again, there are immediate problems with cultural relativism. So before we talk about those objections, you might add just a little bit more to say why we find this appealing, why some people find it appealing. Well, one is that there's obvious variation between cultures in what is seen as morally correct. Some cultures, the author points out, in some cultures it's okay to sunbathe naked. In our culture, we seem to be okay with scantily clad people in bathing suits at the beach. And in other cultures, people are expected to keep most of their entire body covered at all times. Okay, so there are obvious cultural differences between what we view as morally acceptable, and cultural relativism sort of makes sense of that. It says, well, there are so many variations because there's just no fact of the matter beyond that, and cultures determine what is right or wrong for them. Okay, so you might also think that this is a very tolerant theory because it just sort of says, well, there's no further fact, right? Your culture is correct about that, and my culture is correct about this, even though the cultures disagree. Well, the author says, as an objection to cultural relativism, not so fast, because how tolerant you should be, according to the cultural relativist, just depends on how tolerant your culture believes you should be. And if you are part of an aggressive culture that just wants to wage war on all the other cultures, then that's correct, right? That's what morally ought to be done by your culture. If your culture is an aggressive culture that wants to wage war on the rest of humanity, then that's what you should do. It's correct to believe that war is the right thing in that case and not tolerance because your culture is intolerant. And so tolerance is not a virtue for your culture, right? It's not something you ought to promote because you're part of a culture that disapproves of tolerance, we're imagining. If your culture thinks it's the right thing to do to wage war and be an aggressor towards every other culture, then that is the right thing to do because cultural relativism says your cultural beliefs, the culture that you're part of, their beliefs make what's right or wrong. They determine what's right or wrong. They make it right by believing it. And so, whereas you might have thought cultural relativism was appealing because it seems like a tolerant moral theory, the author's saying, no, it's not tolerant. It's only as tolerant as your culture believes you ought to be. And if your culture is a war-mongering, aggressive culture, then it ought to be. It's correct that waging war and being an aggressor towards other cultures is the right thing to do. So cultural relativism is not as tolerant as it may at first seem. That's the objection. The second objection has to do with criticizing your culture. Okay, so there cannot be a morally correct critic of a culture within a culture, according to cultural relativism. And that's because whatever the culture believes is the right thing to do. So if you take our culture, for example, if we believe, which we did a few decades ago, as recently as the 50s and 60s, that segregation is morally obligatory, that white people and non-white people should not be sitting together in classrooms or churches or buses or anything like that. Okay, if you believe in segregation, and if we as a culture embrace segregation, then if you are critical of that segregation, right, if you're critical of a culture that believes in segregation, you're automatically in the wrong. You're incorrect, right? You cannot be a correct moral critic because your culture believes in segregation, and that makes segregation morally right, according to cultural relativism. So if you are critical of that culture and you believe that we should work towards a society that embraces everyone equally, you are incorrect on this view because you are going against what your culture believes. And whatever your culture believes is correct because that's what cultural relativism says, okay? That what a culture believes is correct. So that's why you cannot be a moral critic. You can be a moral critic, but you cannot be correct in your criticism. It's a logical impossibility on this view. And this is another objection because it seems like we have a strong intuition that if you are critical of a culture that believes in segregation, that you are correct to criticize that culture. And the culture is taking the wrong perspective. And it will eventually come around, if it's our culture, come around culturally to recognize, at least broadly speaking, that segregation is wrong. And it seems like the moral critics, like Martin Luther King Jr., were correct in their criticism, and that finally the culture caught up with them, more or less. We can talk about that another day. Um, or we already have a little bit, but okay, so this is closely related to the objection about moral progress because according to cultural relativism, your culture cannot make moral progress. And to see why, let's stick with the segregation example. The way to understand this change, if you're a cultural relativism, the way to understand the change from believing in segregation to not believing in segregation is that originally, when Jim Crow was still the law of the land, we had a correct belief about segregation. Why was that belief correct? Because we believed it. That's what makes it correct, according to cultural relativism. So when we believed in segregation, our belief was correct. We believed that we ought to segregate people by their race. That belief was correct, according to this view. And then when we later came to abolish Jim Crow and desegregate, and we stopped believing that we ought to segregate people by race, that view was also correct. So we don't have this picture of moral progress where we had a false belief and then we exchanged it for a true belief, a true moral belief, and we thereby progressed as a culture. We progressed morally. That is not the right picture. Instead, according to cultural relativism, the view we have to take is that when we had the belief in segregation, it was correct. And now that we've dropped that belief in segregation, our new belief is also correct. And so there's no sense in which we can say that was progress, like we want to. Most of us probably anyway think that it was progress. The cultural relativist has denied that there was any kind of progress because our belief in both cases was equally true. And it was equally true because it was believed. And that's what makes it true. Okay, and the final objection that the author raises against cultural relativism is this idea that perhaps there are more sort of universal overarching values than the cultural relativist recognizes. So as some examples, they say taking care of your young, taking care of children, that's a core value. If it weren't a core value, then any society who didn't believe in it would diminish, right? They'd cease to exist because you have to take care of your young in order for your society to carry on in the future. So as an example, taking care of your young is a value that the author argues is plausibly something that's held cross-culturally, universally. And so the cultural relativist who thinks that that moral beliefs just are inherently varied across cultures, they just vary, they're irreconcilable, that we just can't ever, we can't ever come to agree, that we have irresolvable differences between cultures, that might be too quick. Maybe we're not really appreciating the extent to which there are universal moral values. And a lot of things that look like they're differences in moral values between cultures turn out to be just differences in belief, in factual beliefs. So, as an example, the author talks about a certain culture that when older people are ready to die, they just leave them out in the snow to die alone. Well, we think that's abhorrent, but then it turns out that this culture has a lot of beliefs, religious beliefs about what happens to their bodies when they die and that they will need their healthy, intact bodies in the afterlife. And so they're trying to preserve their bodies in the best way that they can when they die so that they can have access to their healthy bodies in the afterlife. And so it turns out that the values are actually more similar than we might think. It's just the factual beliefs that are very different, that explain why it seems like there are differences in values. But the objection overall states that there are universal values that the cultural relativist fails to recognize. Okay, so that completes our discussion of ethical subjectivism and cultural relativism. So I'm bringing up this slide again from the introduction to remind you the structure of this lecture is it's divided in this way. So we were talking initially about whether there are any objective moral facts. That is, whether there are moral facts that are true independently of what we believe. And the ethical subjectivist and the cultural relativist both say no, there are no objective facts that are independent of what we believe. Instead, morality is based on what we believe. And we saw two different versions of that story. One said morality is based on what each individual believes. That's ethical subjectivism. And the other said morality is based on what each culture believes. That's cultural relativism. So now we're going to move on to a different set of theories, the theories on the yes side. And each of these theories agrees that there are objective moral facts. So there are facts out there about what's right and wrong, for example. And these facts are true even if we don't believe them. If we don't believe them, then we're wrong because they're true. So we should believe them. So there are facts out there and they are true independently of what we believe. It doesn't matter what we believe. They're still moral facts. And if we want to believe correctly, then we ought to believe these moral facts that are out there. And there are four different versions of objective moral theories that we're going to look at: divine command theory, utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics. And they are each going to give us a different way of determining what the moral facts are. So they're going to provide four different bases for morality. What is it that makes the moral facts true? Each of these theories has a different answer to that question. Okay, but again, they agree that there are some objective facts out there that we can be wrong about, right? That morality is not determined by our beliefs, that the facts are out there, just like scientific facts about which star is the closest star or how many stars there are in the universe. We don't even know the answer to that question, but there's still just the number of stars that there are. It doesn't matter what we believe about it. Well, these four theories think ethics works like that there are facts out there and we may not believe them, but they're still true. So starting with divine command theory. So remember, incest is wrong on this theory means God doesn't like it. Okay, more precisely, on this theory, an action is morally right if it accords with God's commands and morally wrong if it conflicts with God's commands. Okay, so whatever God says to do, that's what you should do. Okay, and if God says don't do it, then don't do it, right? You shouldn't do it. And if you do something and God says don't do it, then what you're doing is wrong. Okay, so this theory makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, and this might be the most common moral theory that people just sort of accept. People who think that you cannot have morality without a God, right? That God is why we ought to do the right thing. This is sort of giving us a way to understand what that's all about. Morality comes from God's commandments. It also has an attractive feature, which is that it's sort of solid. You can grasp onto it. There's something there that's reassuring that, people who believe in God believe that this sort of provides a very strong, solid basis to stand on, divine command theory, that it gives you sort of a rock, right? A rock that you can hold on to, that you can know this is why morality is what it is. It's not just about what we believe. There's something bigger than us that's telling us what's the right thing to do. Okay, so what are some objections to divine command theory? Well, a first objection is that different religions disagree about what God has actually commanded. So some religions believe this might be the word of God. This one book is the holy book that God handed to us. And another religion might say, no, this other book is the holy book that God handed to us. And both religions will believe just as strongly that their text is the holy text that reveals God's commandments. But the problem is that they don't agree in what's commanded. So there are all kinds of differences in what different religions believe about what is actually commanded by God. And if divine command theory is true, we don't have a way yet to tell which religion is correct. Okay, so that's one problem, is that different religions provide different claims about what is the word of God, what has God actually commanded, and there's not a way to tell which is the right religion. Okay? Even if we could tell which is the correct religion, even if we agreed about which text is the divine text, the book that reveals what God commanded, there's still the second objection, this problem of interpretation. So a lot of religions believe God says it's wrong to kill. Well, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean that you can't kill anything, no matter what? Does it mean you cannot become a soldier, for example, and kill in defense of your country? Does it mean that it's wrong to kill animals for food? What if you're starving? What about killing bugs accidentally? Is that wrong if you step on a bug without even realizing it? So there's this whole room for interpretation that even if we agree which text is the divine text, that in reading and interpreting those texts, the answers aren't always clear. So if divine command theory leaves this much unclarity, then this is a problem that we want. We want clarity about how we should actually live our lives to come out of the correct ethical theory. We want the correct ethical theory to tell us what to do. And it seems like for a lot of religious texts, there's too much room for interpretation, for different interpretations, to really know what is commanded exactly. Okay, and the final objection we're going to look at is the Euthyphro dilemma. This is from a dialogue from Plato, a ancient Greek philosopher. And there was a person in this dialogue talking named Euthyphro, and that's why it has this name, the Euthyphro dilemma. But the author doesn't use that name, but that's where this problem comes from. And it's sophisticated enough that I've given it its own slide here. And so here's the Euthyphro dilemma. So a dilemma is another valid form of argument. And the structure of the argument says, well, if you believe in divine command theory, then you're committed to one of these outcomes, one of these ways of understanding things. And both of them are untenable. Both of them are wrong. Neither of these can be right. Okay, so the structure of this argument is something like, if P, then either Q or R, but not R and not Q, therefore not P. Okay, so write that down if that will help, and see if you understand how that structure, that will help. That's a little validity challenge for you. But okay, so here are the Q and the R, the two outcomes that you have to choose between one according to this objection if you're a divine command theorist, and neither of them is going to work. Okay, so the first option for the divine command theorist is to think that God commands something because it's the right thing to do. Well, in this case, If God commands something because it's right, then the rightness of that thing is somehow being established independently of God, of God's commandment, right? If God has a reason to command it, then the reason must be something extrinsic to God's commandment, right? It couldn't be that God's just commanding it because he commands it. That doesn't make any sense. So the rightness of the thing, if God's choosing it because it's right, because it's the right thing to do, he's choosing to command that thing, then there has to be some further explanation of why it's the right thing to do, what makes it right. And that's no longer divine command theory. Then you're putting the rightness of the thing outside of God's control. Well, the other option is that it's right because God commands it. God's command actually makes it right. The problem with this option is that God's commandments become arbitrary in the sense that if there's no reason for him to choose one thing rather than another thing, then he's just sort of going around willy-nilly picking what to command, but there's no basis for why he makes the choices that he does about what to command. Okay, so again, the Euthyphro dilemma is saying, if you're a divine command theorist, you have to pick one of these options, and neither of them is a good option. So just to review the options, either God commands it because it's the right thing to do, in which case the rightness of the thing is somehow independent of God, or it's the right thing to do because God commands it, but in that case, God has no basis for choosing to command one thing or another thing. God just becomes this arbitrary deity, just sort of dishing out commandments willy-nilly. Okay, so that is the Euthyphro dilemma. It says if you're a divine command theorist, you have to pick one of these options, but neither of them is a good option. Okay, so these were the three objections to divine command theory. Now we're going to move on to utilitarianism. And again, now would be a good place to stop if you're still with me, a good place to pause the video and come back tomorrow, go outside, go for a jog, take a break because there's a lot in this lecture. So I don't want to be overloading you with too much stuff, but I also didn't want to give you 4 different videos to watch. Okay, so I'm putting all this together in the hopes that you will take care of yourselves and split it up as needed. Okay, utilitarianism holds that actions are right insofar as they lead to the greatest happiness and wrong otherwise. There are a few basic tenets of utilitarianism that I want to talk about specifically. So the first, sort of the starting point for the utilitarian, is that happiness is the only ultimate intrinsic good. The idea is happiness is the only thing you pursue for its own sake. Anything else you pursue because you believe that that will ultimately make you happy. So we go to the dentist, right? Nobody likes going to the dentist. At least I don't like going to the dentist. But I still go because I believe that it will help me prevent suffering that comes from tooth decay and things like that in my mouth, right? So I go to the dentist. I put up with the discomfort and the unhappiness because ultimately I believe that I will be happier if I go to the dentist than if I don't. Okay? Or I clean my house. Even though I don't like cleaning my house itself, I clean my house because it makes me happier when I have a clean house to be in, right? Cleaning the shower especially, I hate that. But I know that I'd rather have a clean shower. It makes me happier when my shower is clean than showering in a filthy shower, right? So all these things I'm giving examples of, I do not because I like doing them by themselves, but because they bring me happiness overall. Now, to say, well, why are you seeking happiness, right? Like, why do you clean your shower? Because it makes you happy. Well, why are you doing what's going to make you happy? That doesn't even make sense as a question, right? Obviously, I'm doing what makes me happy because it makes me happy, because I like being happy, right? That's what I'm pursuing. And that's what it means to say that happiness is an ultimate intrinsic good. We want it for its own sake. We don't need it to get us something else. unlike what's called an extrinsic good, which is something that we only pursue because it brings us something else. So going to the dentist, I would say, is an extrinsic good because it makes my mouth healthy, and that brings me happiness and pleasure and helps me avoid pain and suffering that comes from having a toothache. Okay, so going to the dentist is extrinsically good. It's good because of what something else it can get me. But happiness is good in itself. It's intrinsically good, and it's an ultimate good in the sense that we seek that ultimately. Okay? Money, for example, another example, is an extrinsic good. It's good because of what it can get us, as long as we have this functional economic system where money is worth something. But money's not worth anything by itself. If we didn't have that whole system, if you were stuck on an island forever and you had $100 bill, right? Might just be good for making a fire as fuel. You can burn it. That might be helpful, but it's not really good in itself. Okay? Money is an extrinsic good. Happiness, on the other hand, seems like an intrinsic good. If you were on the island and you were happy, then what more could you ask for? Okay, according to the utilitarian, the right thing to do is the thing that increases the happiness the most. Well, we're talking about net happiness here. Net happiness is just a matter of subtracting the unhappiness from the happiness, right? So the way to make a moral decision, according to this view, is to think about how much happiness will result. And we're talking about how much happiness overall will result. And so we have to also take into account if the action promotes unhappiness, we have to subtract that from our net happiness. Okay, so we're aiming, according to the utilitarian, we should aim for the biggest net happiness, the most happiness overall, when we take into consideration the unhappiness as well. It's very important to utilitarianism that each person's happiness counts as much as anyone else's happiness. Okay, that's what's meant by this phrase, each to count for one and none for more than one. So on this view, my happiness is not worth more because it belongs to me. Just like the happiness of children is not worth more because they're children. Okay, everyone's happiness counts the same. And I've talked about people so far, but another part of utilitarianism is that anyone who can experience happiness counts equally. So that includes my dog, which is why I had to take a minute to leave and let my dog out. My dog's happiness counts just as much as anyone else's happiness. Okay, everyone gets one vote, something like that. Everyone counts once. Nobody is more important than anybody else. The king is not, their happiness is not more important than the most poverty-stricken peasant. Everyone's happiness is equal, according to utilitarianism. And that's what's meant by impartiality. When we say that utilitarianism is impartial, the idea is that you are morally required to consider everyone's happiness equally, okay? To take this principle seriously, that everyone counts for one and none for more than one, even non-humans. Okay, utilitarians are hedonists often. And what that means is that they give an understanding of happiness in terms of pleasure and pain. So what it means to be happy on this view is to experience pleasure and to not experience pain. The absence of pain and the having pleasure and not being in pain is what it is to be happy. Okay? Now, there are different kinds of pleasures and pains, and we have these two conflicting views regarding that. So Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill are two of the most famous utilitarians, and they disagreed on this point. So Jeremy Bentham famously held that pushpin is as good as poetry. Pushpin is some kind of child's game. I don't even know what it is actually, but some kind of children's game. And the idea is that if you get, let's say 3 units of happiness from playing the children's game, and somebody else gets 3 units of happiness from poetry, then they are equal. Okay? And maybe you get 6 units of happiness from reading a good poem, and you get 3 units of happiness from pushpin, well, in that case, playing 2 games of pushpin is going to give you as much happiness as reading a poem, and so they're equal. Okay, so there's no difference between the kind of pleasure qualitatively. There's no difference between the kind of pleasure you're experiencing as long as you are experiencing the same amount of pleasure. Okay, so there's some number of childhood games of playing rounds of pushpin that's going to be equivalent to reading the best poem ever written. Okay, there's going to be some way um, to quantify both of those pleasures, and as long as we have the same amount, then the pleasure is just as valuable. For Mill, on the other hand, there are different kinds of pleasures, and some are just incommensurable with other kinds of pleasures. So Mill famously held, it's better to be dissatisfied Socrates than a satisfied pig, right? Well, the idea is that Socrates is capable of more complex, sophisticated pleasures, and those are just hands down better than the kinds of pleasures a pig can experience, like rolling in the mud or having its back scratched, no matter how much mud rolling and back scratching we're talking about. Okay, some kinds of pleasure are just better. So, um, you know, the author gives the example of watching your favorite TV show or hanging out with a friend. So Jeremy Bentham thought if you get just a few, well, he didn't think this exactly, but applying his view to our present day circumstances, he would say if you get 3 units of pleasure from watching your favorite TV show and 10 units of pleasure from hanging out with your friend for an evening, you could just watch a lot more of your TV show and catch up to the pleasure of having a good friend over for the evening. Well, Mill disagreed. He thought there's some kinds of pleasure are just incommensurable. There's no way to ever catch up in back rubs or TV shows to the pleasure that comes from thinking about philosophy or having a good friend, right? Or being spiritually fulfilled, right? These are just in a different category. Okay, so not all pleasures are equal on Mill's view. But even if we have the same amount of them for Mill, however, every person, every being's pleasure still counts equally. So having my back scratched is just as valuable as a pig having its back scratched, right? So everyone's pleasure counts equally, but we also have to take into account there are different types of pleasure, which may make some kinds of pleasure more valuable than other kinds. Okay, so that's a lot of the main point of utilitarianism, main points. So remember though that the overarching view is that you always have to promote the greatest happiness. That's what the right thing to do is. And when we say you always have to, or that you're obligated to, it doesn't mean necessarily that you will, right? We do the wrong thing all the time. The point is that that's the right thing to do. And so if you are concerned about doing more than just what you feel like, if you actually care about morality and doing the right thing, which most of us do, at least to some extent, some of the time, then this is the right thing to do. This is what you have to do. You have to act so that you're always increasing the pleasure overall. Okay, so there are 5 objections I want to talk about here. So the first one has to do with organ donations. So the example in the text is that you are a surgeon and there are 3 people in your hospital that are sick. One is a priest, a teacher, and the mayor, I think. So the priest, a teacher, and the mayor are all ailing. They're all deathly ill, and they need organ transplants. The priest needs a new heart, and the teacher needs a new kidney, and the mayor needs a new lung, say. I'm just making this up as I go along, but I forget what the details are. But the point is they each need a new organ, a different organ from one another. And at the same time, there's this friendless jerk who comes into the hospital. He's perfectly healthy though, except he has tonsillitis and he needs to get his tonsils out. And so you are operating on this healthy jerk, taking his tonsils out, and you realize that if you just harvest his organs, you can use them to save the priest and the mayor and the teacher because all the organs are healthy in this Poor soul with tonsillitis. Okay, so it seems like utilitarians would have to say, go for it. He will never know, right? He's out already. You put him under with anesthesia and he will never wake up if you just decide to harvest his organs, kill this healthy jerk, and save these three very important people who are each doing a great amount of good, who are each contributing to the overall happiness much more than the average person. Okay, so it seems like utilitarians would have to say go for it, but it also seems at the same time like that's just crazy. That is absolutely the wrong choice. You should not kill healthy people to save other nicer, unhealthy people. You just shouldn't. It's just not something you should do. Life is more sacred than that. People have rights. These are all anti-utilitarian sentiments. Okay, that's the first organ objection. The second objection is the peeping Tom objection. What if there's a peeping Tom and he gets a kick out of watching his neighbors undress? And the neighbors never know it, right? They don't even realize they're being peeped on. Well, it seems like if utilitarianism is correct, that you should always do the thing that promotes happiness the most, and the peeping Tom gets a kick out of watching their neighbors undress, then as long as no unhappiness comes to the neighbors, and that's stipulated in this example because the neighbors never ever find out that they're being peeped on. As long as no unhappiness comes to them, they're not affected in any way whatsoever. It seems like the peeping Tom should just keep right on peeping because they get the joy of peeping. But again, that seems crazy and like the wrong outcome for a moral theory like this. That actually, no, you should not peep on anyone, even if it makes you happy and they'll never find out. Because that's just wrong. People have, again, a right to privacy. And that's just an anti-utilitarian sentiment. Rights are not part of the utilitarian picture because rights can always be overridden for the sake of happiness on this picture. And the peeping Tom case presents an example where that might just be the case, where the greatest happiness might come from something that we just find abhorrent, right? That we think people have rights that are stronger than happiness in this case. The third objection is the promise-keeping objection, which says, look, you promised to pick up your friend from the airport, but then you wake up that morning and you have a headache and you don't feel like going, so you just change your mind and don't go. Well, maybe it makes you happier to not keep your promise. I think I'm mixing up some examples, but oh yeah, okay. In this example, you meet a homeless person on the way to the airport, and the person is having severe stomach pain and walking to the hospital, and they ask you for a ride. And so it seems like if you're a utilitarian, you should stop and give this person a ride to the hospital because that will increase their happiness more than what you agreed to do, which was to pick up your friend at the airport who might be very irritated, but not experience as much suffering as the homeless person walking to the hospital. Okay, so this is an objection only if you agree that you should keep your promise to your friend in this case, right? If you think that, no, actually, here's a case where you should break your promise and take the homeless person to the hospital and forget about your friend, they'll figure it out. There's always Uber, right? Then maybe you don't see this as an objection to utilitarianism after all, because, hey, look how much good you could do by taking this person to the hospital, even though you've broken your promise. Okay, this is an objection. If you're motivated by this as an objection, then that means you see that, no, maybe it shouldn't be that easy to break our promises. There's always going to be a homeless person in more need than a friend you've made a promise to, but you should still keep your promises when you make them. Okay? If you think you should keep the promise, even though it leads to less happiness overall, then you're not a utilitarian. Okay, the next objection is this idea of just spending a lazy Sunday in bed. It seems like utilitarians are going to say it's always wrong to just spend a lazy Sunday in bed because there are better things you could be doing with your time, like volunteering at a homeless shelter or working to make money so that you can give it to people in developing countries who need vaccines, for example. Okay, so it seems like just taking an indulgent Sunday afternoon just to lounge around and do nothing would always be wrong. And this deeper problem is that it seems like there is a difference between doing what you ought to do, where if you didn't do it, it would be wrong not to do it. These are things we think of as being obligatory, like not peeping on your neighbors getting dressed. Obligatory to not be a peeping Tom, on the one hand, and what's called supererogatory actions, which seem to go above and beyond what we ought to do. So it would be good if you did them, but it's not wrong if you don't do it. That's supererogatory. So if you're considering spending a lazy Sunday versus going and volunteering at a homeless shelter, it seems like it would be good for you to go volunteer at the homeless shelter, but it would be above and beyond what you're actually obligated to do. So you could go do that, and that would be a good thing. But if you didn't do it, it wouldn't be wrong of you. Well, the objection here is that utilitarians can't distinguish between what's obligatory on the one hand and what's supererogatory on the other hand. That you're always required to maximize happiness, to increase the happiness the most. And that means on this picture, you are obligated to get out of bed and go volunteer at the shelter or whatever would do the most good that you can do. And that distinction between something that's good, even though it wouldn't be wrong if you didn't do it, that is things that are supererogatory, and things that are obligatory, that distinction just sort of disappears because you're obligated now to get out of bed and go work at the homeless shelter. And it would be wrong if you didn't do it. But we don't really, usually most of us don't think that's how morality works. So most of us think that sometimes it's perfectly okay to spend a day lounging about in bed on a Sunday afternoon. And the final objection that I want to consider is what I've called drowning children here. And the idea is that you're in a boat and there are drowning children all around you, and one of them happens to be your child. And so your child is about 20 yards off to your right. And so you could jump in and swim over and save your child. Or there happen to be two children who you don't even know, you've never met them before, just a little bit even closer to your left, right? And the utilitarian seems to say, because utilitarianism is impartial, everyone's pleasure and happiness counts the same, that you should save the two stranger children because there's more of them than your child, right? There's two of them and there's only one of your child. But it seems like morality is not that cold and alienating, that it seems like if you don't save your own child, then what's wrong with you, right? Any decent person should save their own child before two children they don't even know. If you agree, then again, you are not a utilitarian, because utilitarian is pretty clear that you should save more children even if you don't know them, because who you know is not relevant here, according to the utilitarian. But it seems like who you know absolutely is relevant in our lives and how we make choices and what we actually care about. And that's okay, that it's not immoral to choose your own child over a stranger or even two strangers. That's part of what makes life valuable and worth living, is having these kinds of relationships and being willing to prioritize our loved ones over others. That's a good thing, not something we should sort of deny for the sake of impartiality. Okay, that's a little buffet of objections to utilitarianism. I challenge you to think of other objections to utilitarianism, but at any rate, it leaves us hoping that we can do better than utilitarianism, because these are pretty devastating objections. It seems like utilitarians have not yet given us the right basis for morality, the right way to determine the answers to those questions that we started with originally, right? Think about a utilitarian would respond to each of those questions. You can go back to that slide in the PowerPoint. It seems like we're not there yet. We haven't solved the question of morality yet. How do we determine the answers to moral questions? Well, maybe this next theory, deontology, can do a better job. Deontology comes from Immanuel Kant, who gave us this principle called the categorical imperative. And the principle says, act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. That's a mouthful. So what does it mean? Well, a maxim is a principle. So the idea is that you should only act on principles that everybody can follow. Okay, that's the sort of guiding idea here, is that you should only think of your action, whatever you're about to do, as a rule, and then ask, could everybody follow that rule? And if it's a kind of rule that everyone could follow, that you could just make a universal law, then you should go ahead and do it. It's good for you to do that. And if it's the kind of thing that you could not make a universal law, that if everyone tried to follow that rule, it just wouldn't work, there would be a logical contradiction, then you shouldn't do that thing. Okay, so let's think of some examples. So in one example in the text, one example that is mentioned for each of these moral theories that I've skipped over because for the sake of time, but now I want to talk about it directly, is the case of Robin Hood, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. Okay, the utilitarian would likely say that's the right thing to do because it's going to make more people better off than if the rich got to keep their money. Okay, because the poor are more in need. They are benefited more from having that money than the rich people would be from keeping it. Well, let's see if that action is right according to the categorical imperative. According to the author, it's not. Why is that? Because if you made this into a rule, steal from the rich and give to the poor, steal from people who have excess and give to people who need it, if everyone did that, if everyone just stole from the rich to give to the poor, then we wouldn't have this idea of private property anymore. You wouldn't be able to keep what you have. People would be entitled to take it from you. And so if everyone were living according to this rule, steal from the rich, give to the poor, then private property, the concept of private property just wouldn't last that. It just kind of self-destruct. And then you wouldn't be able to steal anymore because stealing requires this notion of what belongs to whom. Okay, so again, the deontologist is not interested in the consequences. They're not interested in what would happen if everyone tried to act according to this principle, in whether there would be suffering or happiness as a result, or whether it just be chaotic or what. It's whether it's possible, whether it's logically possible for everyone to follow this law. And in the stealing from the rich and giving to the poor case, it seems like it's not possible for everyone to live according to that principle. Because if everyone's tried to steal in that way, then there would be no more private property, and then there would be no more stealing, because you can't steal something if it doesn't belong to someone. And so trying to make steal from the rich and give to the poor a maxim into a universal law is logically impossible. It just couldn't work that way. That's the idea. Another example, back to the promise-keeping one, this example that I got mixed up with before. If you break your promise to pick up your friend at the airport because you have a headache and don't feel like it, well, we can consider two different maxims if you're deciding what to do, two different rules that capture the possible actions in that case. The first rule is always keep your promises even if you don't feel like it. The second rule is break your promise whenever you have a headache and don't feel like it, right? So you're lying in bed deciding whether to go pick up your friend from the airport, and you're considering these two maxims, these two reasons for your action, these two principles that capture the possible choices here. And the idea is only one of these maxims could be willed into a universal law, the first one. So the idea that you should keep your promise no matter what. Okay, so everyone keeping promises, that's easy. right? That works. If everyone just keeps their promise, no matter what, that would work. It doesn't mean that everyone will always keep their promises. We're we're not morally perfect. That's why Kant is helping us be morally better by giving us, articulating these principles. Okay, but if everyone did keep their promises all the time, that would be no problem. That would not be a logical contradiction. If everyone broke their promise whenever they felt like it, or whenever they had a headache, didn't want to keep their promise, then promising would no longer have the force that it does. You wouldn't be able to make a promise anymore because nobody would take you at your word, right? It wouldn't mean that you're going to follow through and do what you say you're going to do, because if people just broke their promises all the time, then there would be no reason to believe that you were going to keep your promise. Okay, so again, we have this kind of internal combustion. It just kind of self-destructs, because if everyone tried to break their promise whenever they felt like it, promise making would no longer have the meaning that it does. Okay, so again, it's not that it would be chaotic and terrible and we'd suffer a lot or anything like that. The Kantian, the deontologist, is not concerned about consequences. They're concerned only with the logical possibility of, of universalizing the maxim. Okay? Okay, so again, a maxim is a rule, and the question is, can everybody follow that rule? Or would it be impossible for everybody to follow that rule? That's what's at issue here with the categorical imperative. Another formulation of what Kant takes to be the same basic rule is this one. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether you're in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an end and never simply as a means. What does that mean? All right, the idea here is that you always have to respect other people as ends in themselves, right? As sort of the autonomous, rational agents that they are. Okay, you have to treat other people like people. You have to recognize that there's a person that you're dealing with and not just someone you can use to get what you want. Okay, so this word simply here is important because you're allowed on this picture to treat somebody as a means to an end. So for example, you can treat your bus driver as a means to getting where you want to go. You can treat your philosophy professor as a means to getting the grade on your transcript that you want. But you have to always recognize at the same time that they're people too. They're autonomous, rational individuals who have their own sort of reasons for being here and their own autonomy to respect. Okay? This is taken to be a different way of thinking about the same categorical imperative that we just looked at in the last slide, because only if we recognize that others ought to be treated as ends, that's what's universalizable. Okay, that's what conforms to a rule that everyone could abide by. If you believe that you ought to be respected as an end in yourself, but not everyone ought to be respected, not everyone else ought to be respected as ends in themselves, then you're making an exception for yourself. You're not acting according to a universalizable maxim, because no one else is going to agree to be treated as a means merely and not also as an end in themselves. Being treated as an end just means you're being respected for your full personhood. And everyone wants to be treated that way. And more importantly for Kant, everyone believes they deserve to be treated that way. And so just like you deserve to be treated that way because you are a fully autonomous, rational person, so does everyone else who's another fully autonomous, rational person also deserves to be treated that way. Okay, that's part of having a universalizable maxim of respecting people as ends in themselves. Okay, maybe some of you who have worked in public service, for example, or customer service, know what it's like to be treated as a means, right? You know what it's like to be used by someone who doesn't even recognize that you're standing there. in many cases, right? They just take whatever you have to give them without sort of also acknowledging and fully appreciating that you are a person just like them. Okay, two formulations of the categorical imperative. Now, one thing that's important to recognize is that why this is called deontology is because it gives us basic moral principles that cannot be violated no matter what, according to Kant. Again, that doesn't mean they won't be violated, because we all mess up all the time. We all mess up a lot. But this is what we should strive for. And for Kant, the only thing that's really good in itself is a good will, which means doing something because it's the right thing to do. Okay, so Kant thinks your motivation is key here. And the right motivation to have is the motivation to act according to rules that can be universalized, according to principles that everyone could follow. So that is the only thing worthy in itself, is doing an action because it's the right thing to do. And some things are right or wrong in themselves, independently of what may happen as a result. Okay, so these are all important features of deontology. This idea that there are basic principles and we can never violate those principles no matter what is part of it. So you'll see how that contrasts with utilitarian. So think about the organ donation objection to utilitarianism. Well, the organ donation example obviously violates this formulation of the categorical imperative. If you decide to kill someone who's healthy, even though they have no friends, just to save other people in order to increase the happiness the most, you are violating their humanity. You're treating them as a means to an end. And for Kant, you should never ever do that, no matter how much happiness would come as a result of that. The same with lying, right? For Kant, you should never ever tell a lie. It's a basic moral principle that you can't just decide to violate for the sake of happiness. That doesn't make it right, okay? Even if you could save a lot of people a lot of suffering by telling a lie, for Kant, there are basic moral rules, and it all derives from the categorical imperative, and you should never violate those moral rules. And why you're doing something makes a difference to whether you should be morally praised for it. And the only praiseworthy motivation is doing something because it follows the moral rules, because you believe it's the right thing to do. Okay, so let's look at some objections to deontology. Well, the axe murderer is probably the most famous one, and in this objection, a friend comes to your house and they are fleeing somebody who wants to kill them, and they ask if they can take refuge in your basement, and you let them in because you're a kind person, and they are hiding in your basement, and then lo and behold, here comes the murderer that's chasing them, wielding an axe, and says, "Is this person in your basement?" The person who's in your basement. And you are faced now with a choice of whether to lie to the axe murderer. Well, for Kant, what do you think the answer is? No, you should not lie to the axe murderer. You should tell the truth, even if it means the axe murderer might find your friend and kill them, okay? Because for Kant, you should always tell the truth no matter what. To lie to the axe murderer would be to treat the axe murderer as something less than an end in himself. So you should not lie to the axe murderer. Tell the truth, even then, even when the consequences are so great and you're risking so much to tell the truth. The consequences for Kant are always irrelevant. Always irrelevant. It doesn't matter how much happiness or suffering is going to come from your decision. The question is only the categorical imperative. And that means that some actions are right or wrong in themselves, no matter what, no matter the consequences. Okay, another objection to Kant is that it's not always clear which is the duty we ought to follow, especially when there are conflicting obligations, or when the categorical imperative seems to give conflicting results, seems to recommend two courses of action, which you can't choose both of them. Okay, I will leave that to you to think for yourself of some examples. and move on to this next objection, which I think is more interesting, that the author, this is from somewhere else, not in the textbook, but I think it really helps highlight the nature of deontology, because this objection dealing with the hospital visitor helps us understand what Kant thinks are the right motivations. So suppose you're sick in the hospital and your friend comes and you say, thank you so much for coming to visit. It really means a lot to me. And your friend says, oh, I don't really care how much it means to you. I'm here because I believe it's the right thing to do. I know that like this is what's obligated of me. It's my obligation to be here, and that's why I'm here. That's one friend. Then they leave and another friend comes and you say, thank you so much for coming to visit me. It means a lot to me. And they say, of course, like I missed you. I care about you. I love you. I wanted to see you and make sure you're doing all right. Okay, which kind of visitor do you want to have? Most of us would probably say the person motivated by compassion, by an actually caring about me, person who wanted to see me, not who's just seeing me because they believed they were obligated to. Well, this brings out this essential feature of deontology, which is that the only thing good in itself, like we've said, is a good will, is doing the right thing because you know it's the right thing. But it seems like that's not always what's morally worthy. Sometimes you want people to act out of compassion or to care about you, not to be thinking through moral principles and deciding what they're obligated to do, but just to do what they feel like, if what they feel like is compassion and compassionate. Okay, so for Kant, compassion is never the right motivation because it's a feeling. And feelings lead us astray as much as they may lead us to do nice things for Kant. Okay, so we shouldn't ever act on feelings because it's just not a sure way to get to the right thing. Instead of acting on your feelings, Kant thinks you should always act on principle. Feelings just get in the way. They make things confusing. Even if your feelings seem very, very kind and compassionate, you should not act on them. You should only act on principle. Okay, but the reason this is an objection, the hospital visitor, is because it seems like no, sometimes it's better to act on your feelings. That the morally right thing to do is to act in a way that's motivated by compassion or caring about someone else and not just acting on principle because it's the right thing to do. Okay, so what do we have? Where are we at? Well, we talked about theories that deny that there's objective moral facts, but now we're talking about those theories that say yes, there are objective moral facts. We looked at divine command theory, which said, do what God says. That's the right thing to do. And we looked at all the problems with divine command theory. We looked at utilitarianism, which says, do what's going to increase happiness the most. We looked at all kinds of problems with utilitarianism. And then we looked at deontology, which says, do the thing that everyone else could also do. Do the thing based on the rules that everyone could follow. And now we've seen why there are serious problems for deontology as well. Okay, on the one hand, utilitarianism says consequences are all that matter. So if you're going to increase the happiness, you should do that thing that does increase the happiness overall, even if you have to kill an innocent person to do it. And that seems crazy because you shouldn't always be ready to kill innocent people just to increase happiness. And the deontologist says, no, some things you should never do, no matter what the consequences. Like telling the truth to an axe murderer. You should do that, no matter what the consequences. And it seems like that seems crazy too. Always holding fast to these principles and never being willing to reevaluate the situation based on the consequences also seems wrong. So we're stuck. We haven't found a satisfying way to answer those moral questions yet. Okay, so maybe the last theory we're going to look at, virtue ethics, can give us a better approach to ethics. So what is virtue ethics? Well, virtue ethics represents a shift in moral thinking. We're turning a major page here, okay? And another good place for a break if you need a break. But the page we're turning is from looking at morality as a matter of doing the right thing or figuring out which action is the right action. Instead of talking about the right thing or actions, now we're shifting the focus to being a decent human being. Okay, we're talking about what it takes to develop a virtuous character. Okay, morality for the virtue ethics is not about right and wrong, like we've been talking about so far. Morality is about being a decent human being, or being a good and virtuous person. And being a good person is about having virtues. And virtues are traits of character. They're not just habits, though they involve habits, being in the habit of acting well or acting with human excellence. Okay? Virtues are not just character traits, they're not just habits, they're also surrounded by dispositions and having appropriate attitudes and motivations. They're complex aspects of who we are that involve how we feel and how we think and why we do what we do, and being willing to do the right thing on a regular basis without even having to think about it. So for the virtue ethicist, it's not about calculating what's the right action or determining the right principle based on moral reason. It's about developing the right kind of character that does the right thing out of just your natural inclinations based on the kind of character you've developed. Okay, here is a long list of virtues: honesty, humility, bravery, friendship, etc. Okay, you might have your own list of virtues. Your list of virtues might be different from this list that I found by Googling list of virtues. But there are lots of virtues. There's no limit to how many virtues there might be. Okay, practical wisdom is the skill of being able to be virtuous, okay, of having the right kind of moral character. Practical wisdom, it's the kind of wisdom that develops over time, okay? That's one important aspect. You can't just do the right thing without having worked over time to develop that character that leads you to do the right thing, okay? It's not about just one action determining through utilitarian calculus or the categorical imperative. It's not about reasoning to determine the right thing. It's about working through time, through the hardships that life presents and the challenges that you encounter to your character, to having to do the right thing. It's about messing up, right? And learning from your mistakes. Okay, these are the kinds of ways that it's developed through time. And practical wisdom, thus, is something that older people tend to have more of than younger people on this view, because it takes time to develop. So if you're naive and inexperienced and you haven't really lived much life yet, then you will not have practical wisdom just because you haven't been around long enough. And I want to add one thing to this slide, which is that it leads to what's called eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is sometimes translated happiness, but eudaimonia is not the same kind of happiness that the utilitarian was talking about. It's not a kind of momentary pleasure or something that is restricted to one particular time. Eudaimonia is the sense of fulfillment, of a life well lived. Okay, it's something you can really only know whether someone's achieved after they're dead, because it's about how your whole life is, whether you actually live a meaningful, fulfilling existence. It's much richer a concept than the kind of pleasure and pain that the utilitarians were talking about. Okay, and the reason that virtues are important, that practical wisdom is important, is because it leads to this kind of eudaimonia, or another word for eudaimonia is flourishing. Okay, a more accurate translation than happiness. This kind of full life, fully fulfilling life well lived. It doesn't mean you'll be without pain, right? There will be hardship as a process, as part of the process of achieving eudaimonia, as part of a life well lived. The point is that you've learned over time how to live well, how to respond to those challenges, and how to develop a decent human character. And the other point is that it's learned through practice. You actually have to be in there, living your life, experiencing the kinds of challenges that you only get to experience if you actually go out and live your life. You actually have to be a part of the world. You can't just sit and study ethics and learn to be good on this view. You actually have to go out and try and fail sometimes, but that will just more firmly help you develop your moral character. Okay, Aristotle gave us the most fully developed version of virtue ethics, and part of that view, his view is, Aristotle, by the way, is an ancient Greek philosopher. Part of his view is the doctrine of the mean, the idea that virtues, being a good person, having the kind of character trait that allows you to be a good person, that's a virtue. What it is to have a virtue is to be able to occupy this mean, or this middle ground between two extremes, excess and deficiency. So the example they give in the text is, the first example is, be courageous. Courageousness, courage, is a virtue, right? It's good to be courageous. What does it mean to be courageous? Well, it means to find the right middle between being a coward, being scared of everything, and being rash, that is just like unwise about what risks you're willing to take. Okay? So being courageous means finding the appropriate middle between cowardice and rashness. Okay? And the same with every virtue on the list that I gave you, or virtues that you may be thinking of that we haven't talked about. Virtues for Aristotle are somewhere in between two extremes. And to know where the right middle ground is, again, there's no formula here. To figure that out, you have to actually go out and live your life. You practice trying to develop the right character and trying to be a decent human being and be a good person. And maybe you'll think you were virtuous in one case, and then after more life experience, you'll realize that you were stupid when you were, not stupid, but you were unwise, right? You didn't have practical wisdom yet in that respect. Okay, so you will learn where the right middle ground is as you have more time and experience practicing being a virtuous person. Okay, one way to figure out what the virtues are is to consider your role models. And we get this great food for thought. And again, the reason I love this book is because of the food for thoughts in the book. And so many of them will be posted as discussion prompts for you to discuss with your group. And you'll have to choose which are most interesting to you. But this food for thought that gives examples of role models, right? Buddha, Jesus, Oprah, Tom Hanks, right? Who's your role model? That's one way to figure out what you think the virtues are, to really determine what you think are the best character traits to try to develop in yourself. Who are your role models? Maybe it's somebody we don't all know, like your mother or your child. Okay, so just a useful way to think about what the virtues are. Consider who you look up to. Objections to virtue ethics. Well, sometimes virtue ethics doesn't really seem to offer us much guidance, right? Like if we want to know, should the death penalty be legal? Or should we defund the police? Or how should we respond to the violence that we're witnessing this week, which happens to be Inauguration Week when I'm recording this lecture? How do we prevent these things in the future? These are all moral questions, and virtue ethics doesn't really seem to provide any help in answering them. Okay, so this is raised as an objection. If virtue ethics might not get us anywhere, really. It doesn't really give us anything to grab onto to understand how to become a better person. Another problem is that there are conflicting virtues. So this might be true from your perspective. You might value courage and honesty, and maybe you can't be courageous and honest at the same time in a particular case. I'll leave it to you to think about other examples where virtues might conflict. But another more serious way that virtues might conflict is that I believe something is a virtue, like chastity, and you believe that sexual pleasure is a virtue. And so we disagree about how much sex it's virtuous to have, right? And so there's not really any way to resolve those disagreements because virtue ethics doesn't tell us what the right virtues are, and different people might have different ideas about what the right virtues are. So we might be left with virtue ethics with some kind of relativism, moral relativism, or ethical subjectivism, which is a place we don't want to end up for reasons we've already considered. Okay, so these are two objections to virtue ethics. Okay, and I want to just, let's just go way back up here to this first slide, because we've been through a lot in this lecture. I've touched on so many different moral theories and talked so much about morality. And what I would just want to leave you with is a reminder that this is about your life. Okay, we get kind of far away from life when we're talking about deontology and the categorical imperative and all these abstract moral theories. We forget that ethics is actually about how we decide to live our lives and what you're going to do next after you finish watching this lecture, how you're going to spend your time, what kind of life you're going to strive to have, and what kind of person you want to be. And so it really is a very tangible subject that is important and relevant for how we go about living our lives, seeking fulfillment, and creating the kind of world that we all want to live in. So that's the end of this lecture. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and this brings us to the end of ultimate questions, our discussions of ultimate questions, and for the rest of the class, we're going to be doing some totally different stuff. So I hope you are excited to turn another big page and do some things a little bit differently. I will see you next week.